Good morning, everyone. On behalf of everyone at the Crest Network, I want to welcome you to this week's webinar. My name is Bill Giannone, and today's topic is Have a Plan, Being Ready for the Next Big One. For many of us, this is always something that we talk about a lot, but we don't really plan for. You just got that call, a large loss right in your backyard, and they need you out there right away. Obviously, this creates a great feeling within all of us. We love getting those calls. For many of us, we'll go months or even years where we're just grinding through our everyday business and some good jobs, some poor jobs. And, we may be struggling and we may be doing just fine, but we're looking for that one home run, where that, let's use a baseball analogy, where that utility infielder who's a really good slap hitter and hits lots of singles and maybe a double here or there. And every once in a while, when they catch one and it goes out of the park, it's excitement for everybody. So you just got that call and you're excited. The company's excited. Everybody's on cloud nine. But are you ready for what comes next? That's always the big question. Are you ready for what comes next? It's never, ever a good feeling to get that call and not be ready. So that's why we're going to spend a little time today talking about this plan, because you have two choices. A week later, you could be sitting back thinking of the things and dreaming of what you're going to do with all that money, or you could be panicking about losing it all because of the disaster. Your company's ability to perform is going to determine whether you are lying on easy street dreaming of spending that money, or whether you're panicking about not only screwing up the job, but also screwing up your entire company. I know it sounds a little overly dramatic, and I'm not doing this for effect. Dick and I have worked with hundreds of restoration companies around the country over the last decade and more. And we can tell you the dozens and dozens of companies that we've spoken with who are out of business now because they just weren't capable of handling the large loss. There's dozens of others who spent years trying to recoup losses or trying to restructure after unsuccessfully performing their services. That's why it's so important for us to talk about having a plan. For us, preparation matters more than anything else. You have to be ready and you have to be willing to plan out your work. So when we're talking about a plan, there are four things you have to have in place before the call comes in. So like I said, what happens next is determined by what you do before that call comes in. Number one, you have to have the right people in place. You have to have the right people for the job. That's a must. You can't sit there and just not worry about it and just say, oh, it'll happen. Don't worry about it. Don't fret it. No, you need the right people. If you don't have the proper people on a commercial or a large loss job, then you are sunk. That job is dead before you even started it. Number one, that's really, really important. After that, you've got to have the right processes. We call that logistics. You need the right processes to be there for a good response. Obviously, you need assets. You need enough equipment. You need enough supplies. You have to make sure that you've got that stuff in place. You can't be scrambling for that once you get the call. So very important to have assets. And lastly, you need a good network of support partners that can come out and assist you on that job. So you see, I did that real fun trick where I used the letters of plan to tell you the four things you need. Well, it does work out that way. You need to have a plan, and these are the four things. We're going to go in depth on each one of these categories: the people, the logistics, your assets, and your network. We're going to go in depth on some of it. So I want you to be able to concentrate on this because it's really important. We're going to focus on, probably two or three areas within each one of these different categories. But I probably venture to say that if we want to start really focusing on some deeper aspects of each one of these categories, between us in personal conversations with your own company, some of you might have a dozen different areas within each of these categories that you need to address. So don't think that it's just going to be a real simple, oh, I've got to put one or two people. No, we're going to worry about all of these things. And we're going to spend some time talking about this. If you think that you've got a company that's perfectly set up for the next large loss, I appreciate that. And I think that's great. Stick around and let's see if everything that we talk about in the next 40 minutes or so lines up with everything you've already got. If you do, congratulations, that's perfect. You've been reinforced. You've been verified as to everything you've got and everything that you want to do. And I think that's a great thing. And you are ready for that next loss. If not, let's start talking about it right now. First P of the plan stands for people. There are some key personnel that you have to have in place, ready, and trained in order to have a successful large loss project. Let's talk, first of all, you need a project manager. You need someone out there who can run the show for you. You know, even if we're not guys who are very handy, if we're guys who went from being chuck in a truck owners to now we're much more of an owner operator as opposed to an owner doer, we're more of a owner manager rather than being in the field. A lot of times when the large loss comes in, we revert back to being the guy in charge. That's all well and good, but you know what happens then? If that's the case, a lot of times you're sacrificing everything else going on in your company to spearhead that job. Now, if that job's large enough, maybe that is a good idea or a good direction for your company to go. But let's just remember, projects work best when there's a single point of contact trained and ready to handle that for you. So let's identify someone in your company. Maybe you've got a mitigation manager. Maybe if you got a couple of crews, there's one guy who is much better trained and much better geared towards being a large loss manager. Maybe he's got more commercial experience. Maybe he's better at talking with adjusters. Maybe he's great at talking with property owners or property managers. That would be a guy that I would steer towards that role of project manager. Make sure he understands everything that needs to be done on a job. It's not just about going out there, sucking up water and setting equipment. You know, on these large losses, the larger the loss, generally speaking, the less important the restoration company is on a ratio of how important, big, or serious that job is. Let me explain that. I know that sounded a little confusing. When there's a little water loss in a house that requires maybe a little bit of a flood cut, some demo, obviously extraction, and then drying, and then put back. The mitigation company, their part of that bill might be, you know, $5,000-$6,000 of a $10,000 claim. So we represent maybe 60% of the job, and we might represent 60 to 80% of the time spent in that house. On a commercial loss, let's say our job is $100,000 or $150,000 large loss, which for just about every company should constitute a large loss. But there's a really good chance if that is in, let's say, a hotel, and we have, let's call it 20 rooms affected, and our bill comes to 150,000. If there's 20 rooms affected, by the time that entire claim is done, that could be $1 million claim. By the time we're putting back all of the different materials and all of the different carpets and walls and wallpapers and things, by the time we've addressed the inconvenience of moving maybe some guests around the hotel, maybe taking a hotel elevator out of service or a wing of a hotel, and then the business interruption that that hotel is going to experience, that claim might end up being $1 million. You see, now we went from being 60% of the claim on our bill and 80% of the time and effort to now our bill might only be 15% of that loss. And maybe we're only there for a week or so, and that could be a 3 or 4 week putback. So our importance and our significance in the loss becomes less and less. So it can't just be, well, let's just go in and we'll do everything we want to do. We have to work with others. We have to communicate with those property managers. Maybe the owner of the property has their own unique aspects. Obviously, the insurance company, if we're talking about business interruption, is going to have something to say about what we do. Maybe he's going to insist that we do our best to dry in place, because if we start ripping things out, that might result in a much longer business interruption. So the cost to that business operating might be far greater than our attempts to dry in place. So we have to work collaboratively. In order to do that, we need a project manager who's able to have that communication line with all the parties. Large loss doesn't just necessarily denote, oh, it's a bigger win for us. Now, obviously, our invoice is larger, but if we screw it up by not communicating, our risk is also much, much greater. So let's make sure we have someone there who understands the company's role and in turn, their role. Let's put someone on who understands that. Along with a property manager, you need a project administrator. You need somebody who's absolutely going to document everything you do. For most of you who have been part of classes that I've given over the years on large loss administration, and if you've been part of a class that Scott Tarpley has given with Dick Wagner and myself over the years on large loss and getting paid for it, you understand the importance of the administrator. You understand the importance of communication and documentation. Everything on that job needs to be documented, or there's a really good chance you're not going to get paid for it. So let's make sure that we have somebody who understands the level of documentation we need on that job. This is a very important role. I've worked with hundreds of companies on large loss in the last 12 years since I entered this industry. And the one thing I stress to them is, I don't care what you've got to do. If you need to take somebody out of your office and make your office a little weaker for a few days, it's that important to have them on that job documenting everything. And what do I mean by documentation? I mean, you need to have logs that record all of your equipment on the job. Every piece of equipment has to be logged onto an equipment log. You need to make sure that all your labor is signing in and signing out. You need to make sure that someone's keeping track of all your consumables on that job. It's not good enough to just say, oh yeah, I used 15 boxes of garbage bags. You need to document who signed those garbage bags out. What part of the building did they go to? What day did you use them? All of that goes into the narrative of what we're doing on that job. And that's how we get paid, documenting our activity. You also need to make sure that somebody's taking pictures of the activity. You need to make sure somebody's going around the building documenting the work that's being done. Finally, any conversations that take place on that project between, let's just say, the project manager and the property manager, or those two parties and the adjuster or the adjuster's experts, any communication whatsoever, daily activity logs from the project manager, all of that needs to be documented as well. They need to be written down. We use the term memorialized. Any verbal conversations or observations that are made should be written down. Let's make sure we're doing that on the job. That's the role of the project administrator. That person is just literally all over the building all day, documenting everything being done. If there's any changes to the scope of work, that needs to be documented as well. Let's just say we had told the adjuster that we're going to cut the drywall. And when we cut the drywall, now we found mold behind the wall and we need to address that mold. That wasn't part of the original scope. We need to document that in our paperwork. All of that's part of the documentation that the project administrator is responsible for. See how important it is to have that person ready and trained before the job? You can't put somebody on the job on day 2 and say, here, go do this. You're going to really, really hurt yourself. So someone has to be trained and understand how to do that. Finally, the most important person after the project administrator and the project manager is a large loss technician. It's not just like another residential loss, just bigger. It's not like that. There's a really good chance that you're going to be manning a project that has a lot of personnel on the job. Most of our residential losses have one crew, maybe 2 crews out there. Our crews might be 2 people. A lot of companies operate where they just send one guy out to do all the work. If you're sending out one guy or just a crew of two, their responsibilities as large loss techs are far different than if you're sending out there to manage 8 or 10 guys in a hotel. Take a look at this picture here. For this whole hall, you might have one large loss technician responsible for what's going on in 8 or 10 rooms and in this common space. That large loss technician is obviously far more of a supervisor than he is a doer. He's obviously doing as well, but he's also managing and supervising what's going on in that hallway and in those rooms in that hallway. He needs special training. He needs to understand what his responsibilities are. You can't just throw him out there. If you just put him into this loss and say, here, go to town, you know what he's going to do? He's going to go into one of those rooms and he's going to act like a technician. He's going to do the work in that one room, just as if he's working in one room of a home. And then all that other work is going to go unsupervised and unmanaged. We need to make sure that these technicians understand that they have far more responsibility. They're part of documenting the processes for the administrator. They're part of following the protocol set by the project manager. They're part of that chain of communication. They're going to be part of the L for logistics when we get to that. So they need to understand their role here on large loss is far different. I described something before of a hotel that might have 50 rooms out of service. If you've got a company of 4 technicians, guess what? If there's 50 rooms out of service, you now have all of your technicians basically acting as supervisors for the work that's being done in that building, because each one of them is going to be responsible for 10 to 12 to 15 separate rooms, plus all the common areas. They are much less of a technician and far more of a shift supervisor. Understand that beforehand and make sure that they understand on large loss, their responsibility matrix changes. I know you've all got questions. Well, how do we make sure that they are in place and trained? Well, that's where we at the Crest Network come in. That's part of what being a Crest member gets you. It gets you the ability to have your staff trained specifically for those responsibilities. We at the Crest Network for years have been training companies on how to handle large loss before, during, and after the loss. So once again, not just your people, but all the other parts of your plan are going to be developed through being a member of the Crest Network. Reach out to us, tell us this is what you need. And if it's not your P, if you got all your P for your people taken care of, maybe you need help with your logistics, your assets, or your network. As we continue to talk, write down little notes on where your company might be weak. Make sure you get back to us. If you're not a Crest member and you're watching this webinar and you understand that you are weak in one or more of these areas, maybe that's the impetus for you to become a Crest member. I'm telling you that any one of these issues could be $100,000 loss if they're not addressing them. If you do address them, you're going to make that much money. That $100,000 large loss that you're going to execute properly is going to pay for years worth of your Crest membership. Just figured I'd throw that in there right now because I'm sure that many people are asking the how question. How do I get my people trained? Let's move on. Your logistics come next. You need a process for everything on that large loss, including your initial response. We're not going to talk so much about the logistics once we get to the job. And once the job is running on days 2, 3, 4, we're going to talk about a lot of the things that happen at the start of the project. Remember, I said before we could talk for a dozen different categories within the L, the logistics. We're going to highlight and focus on 3 right now. Number 1, believe it or not, that takes a lot of forethought, very little effort, but screws us up right from the start, is how to load the truck. Most of us have our truck set up really, really well for what I'll call everyday response. That whole mindset of fire engine ready. Yes, you're going to call at 2 a.m, you want your truck all set. So we've got nice shelves and, I'm all over Facebook and I see all these groups and I see all of us bragging on how well we've got the inside of our truck set up. That's fantastic. All of that works really well on everyday losses. I also see the brag book of what our warehouse looks like, pictures of row after row of beautiful racks set up with beautiful equipment, all color coordinated and all numbered and very organized. By the way, guys, I think the worst possible picture a company can have is a picture with equipment all filling the racks. Obviously, the best picture for a restoration company are empty racks, because that means all your equipment is out there spinning and making you money. But I digress. We've seen those pictures. When I think about loading a truck for large loss, I don't think about how neat and clean everything is. I think about this truck to the left. I think about how much equipment can we pack onto a truck or onto a van or onto a 53 footer to maximize our ability to efficiently and quickly load that truck. I'll tell you from anecdotal stories, I've been involved with large loss where it has taken 6 to 8 hours to load one 26 footer with the equipment necessary for large loss. If you've got 4 to 6 guys loading a truck for 6 to 8 hours, you're clearly not ready to perform that loss, because you don't have a way to efficiently load that truck to maximize your time. Yeah, you probably squeezed every last air mover onto that truck, but the time it took you to do it was a real waste of time and assets that could have been diverted onto the job itself. It's a real waste of time. If we're not planning on loading the truck properly, then we're wasting our time before we even get to spend it. Now, how do we do that? Let's make sure we've got a vehicle, first of all, that is there dedicated for this particular thing. Maybe you don't have a truck that can handle this. Well, let's go invest a couple $1,000s and buy ourselves a tow behind trailer. If we invest in a tow behind trailer that just sits empty, we could put hundreds of pieces of equipment on that in a short period of time. And then that could be our large loss. And we just pull it with one of our F-250s if we got one of those in our inventory. If we've got the ability to, have a box truck that we use, let's make sure that box truck is ready to be loaded. How do we do that? Well, maybe we've got some excess air movers that we don't really use on an everyday basis. Let's palletize them. Let's put them onto a pallet. Let's stack them and let's shrink wrap them so that when it comes time, we can put that entire pallet onto a truck. And within a minute, we could get 20 air movers on a truck instead of 2 at a time. That's a real efficient way to get stuff done. Then when it gets to the job site, it's nice and neat and clean. And then we could, offload by hand. But we've already got it there and it didn't tumble over inside the truck because it's palletized and shrink wrapped. Just something to think about. That's a really unthought about. I'm at a lack of words here. It's a small thing in details, but if we're worried about the logistics of large loss, it's getting off to the right foot. And loading the truck properly makes us feel good, makes us look good when we get to the job site, and it's all about presentation. The next thing that's all about presentation is your physical setup. You need to know when you get to a loss where you want to stage your trucks and your equipment outside the building. When we go to somebody's home and they've got a loss, there's really not too many options. We're going to put our truck in the front of the house, or if we get the homeowner's permission, we're going to put our truck probably in the driveway. There's really not many options. When we're talking about going to a business, we're talking about far more options on where to put it, but also far more considerations. Let's just throw a hotel, for instance. Guys, the last place we want to stage any of our vehicles is in front of the building. We don't want to raise suspicions or concerns with the guests in that building if they happen to be in the building, in an area of the building where the loss didn't occur. Unless it's a catastrophic loss in the building where it affects everybody, we should be very sensitive as to how we respond. Many of us have on the side of our trucks, we do a good job of branding our vehicles. And many of us have that fire, water, mold, emergency services, flood damage. We don't want to alert the guests in the building to something seriously wrong. That's going to create a negative impact on the building itself. A lot of times we want to come in, we want to throw our trucks in the back of the building If we need to set up a desiccant similar to what you see here in the picture, we want to make sure it's going into an area of the building that's very unobtrusive and not really observed by the frequent guests in and out. We also want to make sure it's probably not seen from the street if we can avoid it. These are concerns that we have. We have to make sure that if we're using uh, if we need to have access to either elevators or staircases for getting debris up and down, we want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing the ability of the patrons in the building. If it's an office building, the other tenants in the building, we want to make sure that we're not interfering with their ability to operate their businesses as well. This is a very, very big, important thought process. Before we start doing our work, we have to have that opinion and we have to communicate and be part of the process with the building manager. Maybe the property manager knows, hey, you know what? It's only on the left side of the building. So let's do everything on the left side. And yeah, you're not going to be able to use the elevators. You're going to have to lug all the garbage bags up and down 3 flights of stairs. We have to make do with that, guys. We have to make do with the fact that this is something we have to think about. Okay. Physical setup matters a lot. Let's think about that before we start our work. This is part of your logistics. Another big part of your logistics is timing your work. If you're working in a hotel, there's a really good chance that most of the work you're going to do in the hotel is going to have to be done between the hours of 9 and 6. Why is that? Well, hotels are usually reserved for people who are either on vacation and are spending the day out of the room, or they're there for business people who are there for business and they're spending the day out of the room. They're in the room at night, either doing work, communicating, or obviously sleeping. We're not going to be able to work. Conversely, if we're working in a school or if we're working in an office building, what is the most opportune time for us to be doing our work? Yes, it would be in the evenings. It would be showing up at 6 o'clock and working till 5, 6 in the morning. Yes, that happens all the time. We need to time our work and we need to be sensitive to the fact that we need to time that work around the wants and needs of the property in question. That's a logistical issue. All of our people, all of our response, all of our efforts for when we're going to deploy our assets, when we're going to need our network, and when we're going to need our people revolves around this logistical issue. I haven't even addressed any of the other logistics about how we're going to extract from the 15th floor when the pipe breaks on the top floor of a high-rise building. I haven't talked about any of that. These are just logistics that you have to think about before the work starts. And you see what we're talking about here. If you don't have a process in place for large loss that addresses these things, you're really behind the 8 ball. That's how serious this is when we compare large loss response to our normal everyday commercial residential response. I know I don't want to blow your mind, but I want to sober you up into thinking that, oh, I got this call, we're ready to go. Let's start talking about the assets. Without the proper amounts of company assets, your project's doomed from the start. Now, yes, there are certain assets that we will be able to secure when we talk about your network, but we really need to make sure we've got a certain amount of company assets in place. You need more than just a few air movers to be confident in your execution. If you don't have enough drying equipment and extraction equipment to do large loss, you're really behind the 8 ball. You probably shouldn't even get that call in the first place. Let's make sure that if we're doing 15 to 20 residential jobs a month, let's make sure that we're not running out of air movers or dehumidifiers or scrubbers until we get to that 25th job. We should always have enough equipment there to handle what I always say, a peak residential surge. So if you're doing 15 to 20 jobs a month, you should have enough equipment for 25. Now, if you do, you're not hurting your normal 15 job month, by getting a large loss, which might require enough equipment for 10 residential jobs. You've got enough equipment there. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Don't sit there and say, well, I've got 10 air movers and I've got 2 DUs because I only do a couple jobs at a time. I'm pretty good when I get that hotel loss. No, you're not. You need to make sure you've got enough for at least the initial steps. So you need extraction equipment, you need dehumidification equipment, and you need to make sure that you've got air filtration equipment enough to handle that. That's very important. In addition, make sure when you show up, you've got enough supplies and you've got enough tools for what I call proportional response. You can't show up with 2 boxes of garbage bags if there's a 50-room loss. You're going to need a lot more garbage bags than just 2 boxes. If you need 50 rooms of extraction, you can't show up with 1 portable extraction unit. You need to make sure you've got enough. Obviously, you need more than 2 air scrubbers as well. Let's make sure we've got proportional amount of assets for large loss. I'm not saying you need 50 scrubbers, but I'm saying let's not show up with 2. Let's not look like it's out of our league. Let's show up with enough equipment that makes us look legitimate, because then we're buying time until we can have the cavalry show up. After that, let's make sure we've got enough staffing. Most companies don't have enough staff to handle large losses. No one does. Believe it or not, even Belfour and ServPro don't have enough staff in their normal course of operations for a large loss. That said, you need to make sure your own staff is available to be able to handle their responsibilities like we talked about before. You can't sit there and just say, well, I'll just put my project manager on it and I'll just get temp workers to handle everything else. No, you need to make sure you can manage the work. You are responsible to manage that work. It's not a good enough excuse to say, well, I brought in workers, they didn't know what they were doing. Guess what? If that's the case, that still falls back on you. So you need to make sure you've got enough team members to handle that. If you're only a guy who's got 2 or 3 technicians, you're probably not a company that should be doing large loss. You should hand that off to one of your neighbors who's a larger company in your area and work out some sort of, referral fee. I know that's a curse word to a lot of you guys out there, but I'm trying to protect you. I don't want to see you get buried by saying, oh, I can handle it. And then all of a sudden you don't have your own personnel there and the job goes upside down. Let's make sure we've got enough in-house personnel to staff this job. Finally, you need free cash. What do I mean by free cash? You need to literally have enough money in the bank, or you need to have enough money in your own pocket that you can dedicate to the job. There's 2 facts about large loss that are always, always true. They are far more costly to execute than normal residential losses, and it'll take you far longer to collect on your invoice. Let's talk about these 2 facts. Number 1, why are they far more costly to execute? Well, number 1, for just about every large loss, you're going to have to bring in some support people. So you're going to have to bring in outside companies. Those outside companies are going to work and they're going to submit an invoice to you. You've got to pay that invoice in a timely fashion. You don't usually have too many outside vendors on your residential losses. Maybe you had to put a dumpster there, so you have a dumpster bill, but you're not going to have to pay for hundreds of, helpers. You're not going to have to pay for a ton of extra equipment. You're not going to have to pay for experts to come in and help you. That's usually reserved for large loss. So those expenses are going to be there. It takes you far longer to collect because when people look at large loss invoices, the insurance companies really do examine large loss invoices a little more technically and a little more in depth than they do on residential losses. Residential invoices kind of look generic. I know a lot of you will tell me that every loss is different, and I agree, every loss is different. But by and large, the same 20 line items show up on most residential invoices. When we're doing commercial invoices, we're not really invoicing them the same way. And without getting too technical, a lot of times we're using the documentation that we create on a job and we're invoicing on what they call a time and materials basis. We're not using Xactimate or some sort of line item unit pricing. We're using, here's how many hours we were on the job, here's how much equipment we put on the job, and here's what we spent in terms of subs and consumables. When we do that, the insurance company really does analyze what our people did. That's why I said all those activity logs are important as well. We tell a story. I would venture to say that it takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days to collect on a commercial invoice, whereas in most cases, we're trying to collect our money on residential invoices within 30 days. So it's going to take you longer to collect on your invoice. I know invoices for jobs that, when I talk about not perfectly executed, I know invoices that take 2 to 3 years to collect. Don't jump off the bridge right now, guys. There's ways we can address that as well. But the reality is it does take a lot longer. Let's know that those two facts exist. So for those reasons, you have to have cash available in order to execute the project without delays, without issues, and without complications. This way, what you do on the job really doesn't get handcuffed because you can't afford to do it. Let's understand. Those are just 3 assets that you have to worry about, but they're very important assets. Finally, let's roll on to the network. When we talk about the network, no one executes large loss by themselves. This includes the big boys. No one does that. You must have access to resources before you get the call. Because when you get that call and then you go out and you see that there's 50 rooms in a hotel affected, you don't have the ability at that point to start trying to discover resources. You have to have those relationships in place. Number one, you need to have equipment rental relationships in place. If you're a member of the Crest Network, you've already got an incredible relationship with our partner and our dear friends, the Drying Team / DEI, Drying Equipment Incorporated. Scott Tarpley, Misty, and their people are incredible resources for you for any type of equipment. If you only need 100 air movers, they're the right person for you. If you need a setup like this, which is a DEI setup, a Drying Team setup, where you need desiccants, generators, propane, they are the perfect partner for you. You need to make sure that on large loss, you've got the proper equipment, not just enough equipment, but the proper equipment. Not only will they help you with the equipment, but they'll also help you with handling that equipment. They are experts at being your partner on the job. And there are other companies out there. I don't mean to badmouth anyone else. I'm just telling you that as a member of the Crest Network, you've got a unique relationship with DEI and the Drying Team that we love to brag about because they are such an incredible resource, not only for the Crest Network, but for our members and for all other individuals in the restoration community. But it is important. Have a relationship with these companies. You cannot do large loss without them. Obviously, we've talked about this before, but you're going to need labor on these jobs. If you've got 50 hotel rooms that need to be addressed, you can't send 4 guys out there and say, oh, I'll get to them when I get to them. You'll probably be thrown off the job before you even get your first room done. So where can you get 100 laborers in 3 hours? You've got to have those relationships. There are lots of local companies in your area that you may have a relationship with. Make sure you talk to them because you probably have called somebody for 3 or 4 workers on, let's just call it a larger residential. How do you address it when you need 50 to 100? Can that labor source provide that labor for you? If the answer is yes, make sure they are aware that there are times when you're going to need them. If the answer is no, you need to get a resource from somebody who knows how to handle that. Now, we at the Crest Network can turn you on to labor sources around the country in your area that have the ability to get you 50 to 100 workers who will be able to do what you want them to do. Make sure you do that. You need to have resources in place. Temp labor is a fact of life on these losses. It's not only a fact of life for you, it is a fact of life for the big boys as well. Finally, you need to have access to consultants. Don't ever think you can handle it by yourself. I don't care how many losses you've ever done. I don't care how experienced you are on large loss. There are people out there who their only job is to support and assist contractors like yourself with large losses. Think about it this way. If you do it yourself and you have a chance to possibly expose your company to tens of thousands of dollars of risk on that job, why wouldn't you hire a consultant who's going to take that risk away from you and more than likely is going to increase your bill? They're going to make the project run smoother. I don't care how well your people are trained. You bring in the right consultants, they're going to make your project run smoother. They're going to make your project look more professional. And they are, at the end of the day, they're going to make you more money. There's no doubt. That's just a fact. Make sure you understand that when you bring in a consultant, those consultants work with you and for you. They're not there to help the insurance company out. They are the right people to bring in to talk with the insurance carriers and the property managers, especially if you find out that the carrier has brought in their own consultants. That's a really important aspect, guys, and I can't stress that enough. We call it the hat on a hat theory. If you're getting sued and you get served papers by a law firm because you're getting sued, you'd be crazy to ever try to defend yourself without hiring a lawyer. Because if they've got a lawyer, you have to have a lawyer. Well, if this is true there, this should be true as well for large loss. If the insurance company brings in consultants to help them, you really absolutely should bring in consultants to help you. Yes, it will come at a cost. But remember, they're not taking money out of your pockets. They're literally putting money into your pockets. Where can you find these consultants? Well, if you're a Crest member, you've already got them. Part of what the Crest Network provides to you is access to consultants in every aspect of large loss. We've got consultants at the Crest Network who handle the logistics and the execution, the production side of large loss. We've got experts who handle the administration side, the people side of large loss. And we've also got experts who handle the invoicing and collection side of large loss. So let's make sure that no matter what you need on a loss, if you're a member of the Crest Network, you've already got it. You call Dick or myself, and you've got instant access to those consultants. If you're not a member of the Crest Network, again, I don't want this to sound like an infomercial, but if you're not a member of the Crest Network and you need access to consultants, you need to be a member of the Crest Network because that's where you get access. Remember, without a plan, this is what you look like. With a plan, it changes. Now you can rest easy and you can dream about what you're going to do with all that money. We've all seen this phrase before. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Large loss mitigation is not something you should ever try to wing it. You need a plan in place. You need to understand. You need the right people. You need the right logistics. You need the right assets, and you need the right network. If you've got those four pieces down pat, like I said before, if you just watched this webinar and you just went through this and said, I got it, congratulations. You are ready for large loss. If anything I just said to you had you scratching your head saying, I'm not sure if I've got that in place, then you need to give me a call. You need to give Dick Wagner a call, and we can walk you through that as part of what we provide to you as a Crest member. We'll be able to walk you through that process, and we'll be able to make sure that that plan is absolutely in place for you. It's great that you're getting the work. It's horrible that you're not executing the work according to this plan. Let's make sure the next time you've got the call, you've got this in place. I promise you, you're going to see a big difference. You're going to sleep better. You're going to feel better. You're going to have fewer issues, and you are going to make more money. On behalf of Dick Wagner and everyone here at the Crest Network, I really want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you every Tuesday morning. We look forward to hearing back from you. If you've got any questions, comments, please reach out to Dick or myself. It's very important. We really, really do value your feedback. When you've got questions or comments, we do our best to share them monthly with the rest of the Crest members. So don't think that you're just, sharing a question with us that is meaningless. All of your questions or comments mean a lot, not only to us as the founders and owners of the network and as your coaches, but they mean a lot to your fellow members as well. We find that we get so much feedback at times from members because of the webinars, and when we share it in our monthly Q&A sessions, we also find that we're getting a lot of feedback saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just covered that for me because I had that very same question." So we always say there's no dumb questions. There's only dumb answers that we provide, and we kind of giggle about that, but there really are no dumb questions. There's just maybe in our first initial presentation of the information, we took something for granted, or we kind of rolled something over without really going in depth, or we just didn't have the time. We use those Q&A sessions at the end of every month to cover that. So we do appreciate your feedback. As always, we want to wish you much success. We want to thank you so much for being with us today and every day. And we want to wish you a very great week ahead. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.